as a group of people, maybe a combination of utility board members and citizens that you can use as kind of your sounding board and the people that have time to dig into the weeds. Because you guys are busy dealing with electric utility issues as well as telecom, and rather than burden you with having to, learn as much, you could entrust a separate committee to be an assistant to you. Keep in mind that if you do that and that committee is designated thus as part of your governing structure, then those folks would be subject to the same open meetings rules that you are. So, but you might consider that as someone to basically provide you the assistance you need, especially in the early years where things are going really fast and you're having to have a very steep learning curve. The rest of the organizational structure you see there in that diagram is just based on what was in the FAR report. The general manager, and this is just taking into account the structure of the telecom part, right? Obviously, your general manager oversees your electric department, and that has a flow of organization as well. But you would have a lead technician, and a regular technician would report to that lead, a customer service supervisor, and a customer service person that would report to that person, and then an accountant bookkeeper who is really just a quarter time. They do other things for the electric utility as well, but part of their time is dedicated to telecommunications. This is certainly by no means written in stone, but this makes sense based on the FAR's recommendations for personnel and staffing, and we believe that their suggestions there for personnel and staffing should be adequate for what you need. Any questions to this point? Next thing we did is utilize the survey to try to zero in on a better idea what take rates could be expected to be here in Vinton. Now the FAR the FAR feasibility study used a ramp up of service take rates from about 40% of households beginning in year 1 up to 62% in year 5. And as a subset of that, the assumption is that, if everybody who gets your service is getting internet, and then some subset of that will get voice and telephone, or voice and cable. We adjusted those numbers based on what we saw in the survey, because that survey asked people to tell you if they have video, if they have phone. And so we wanted to be true to those take rates of those individual services. For example, while FAR was estimating 88% would get your TV service in year 1, about 70% in the survey said today they have TV service. So we're going to start at 70, and we're going to decline that number over time as more and more people cut the cord. Maybe you'll do such an awesome job they won't do that. That's great. Same thing with telephone. A higher than recommended take rate was in the FAR study. We adjusted that down to the number of people in the survey that said they actually have phone, which in Vinton was 45% that have a landline. So using the FAR numbers as a base, we adjusted those based on what we learned about the survey, but also what we learned about what other communities have experienced as far as that overall ramp up. The ramp up of where you go from 0 on day 1 to some percentage in year 5 is a pretty important number for these financial people to put into their models, right? So we wanted to get that as close as possible to what we think the real world will hold, while being conservative about that. So what we did is, I looked at what other communities have seen. For example, Waverly just launched 2 years ago, and their actual take rates were, at the end of year 1, 35% of the towns and the people in town had switched over to them, and at the end of the year 2, which was just about a month and a half ago, they were at 50%. I looked back at the take rates that I saw back in the old days in Spencer, when I thought had a fairly aggressive rollout, and we were at about 35 in year 1, 45 in year 2, and then it went up from there. I took a look at what Indianola is seeing today. Indianola is getting ready to start offering services this fall, and they've been doing a pledge drive for people that are saying right now, I want connected as soon as it's ready. And they have about somewhere in that 30 to 40% of the people in their town have signed this pledge card, meaning year 1, by the end of year one, they should have at least 30 to 40%. So taking all that into account and using just a little intuition about the market, I adjusted the overall take rates down a little bit in the early years from what FAR was thinking, but a little higher in the out years. So I've got it starting at 35% at the end of year one, 45% in year two, 55% in year three, then going up to 60% at the end of year four and 65% at the end of year five. And again, that doesn't mean growth will stop at that point. I would certainly expect that you would continue to see those services grow at a slower rate as you move out past years 5, because that's the experience we've seen with every other municipal telecom in Iowa. And unless you guys do something a lot better or a lot worse than they did, you're going to see take rate ramp up on a similar basis. So any questions about the take rate assumptions and adjustments? And again, these adjusted numbers all went into what Todd and Michael have worked out.
And so that reflect the dollar amounts that revenue goes down, if the take rates go down.
Yes.
So it's already into Todd's work.
Yes. Yep.
Why didn't those Cedar Falls survey do business? And then is that Waverly you used to for the community?
Yeah, I use Waverly as far as the take rate ramp ups.
On the business. Business take rates. And you said they didn't do business, so.
Your survey that you did this spring did not differentiate between business and residential customers.
Why didn't they do that first? Because business has been really a big pusher here in this local community, and I'm surprised they didn't check businesses. 220 businesses, I think we go by, and we've had really good input from the ones that come here, but we only give maybe 10 or so businesses out of 220, so I'm concerned about the other 210 or so businesses out here.
And I understand that. The issue with the UNI survey is that it was principally responded to via mail. And so, and quite frankly, the concern about businesses, I think, is significantly less for a couple of reasons. One is we did a not scientific survey that still indicated very strong interest. Number two, the people who do show up tend to be business folks. So I really think, in my opinion, the risk, such that there is really more on that residential side. I think the business thing is fine. And if you wanted to do something more formal, it could be done. But I think you're going to find that is pretty solid. There was some concern also about making the survey too complex. So making the survey even longer to reflect the opportunity that you could respond both as an individual and as a business creates more questions, more complexity, takes longer to take. And we really were interested in having the highest possible number we could from residential, and we achieved that. We were off the chart.
Again, the most local people in our business, a few businesses. I went to a meeting in Kirkwood, and for the business people, and it's the exact same people here with that meeting, which still is a handful compared to the entire community. So I'm concerned about the other business people. That's just my concern.
Curtis, maybe you can talk a little bit, and I don't know if you did this, but given Vinton's relatively small number of businesses versus how many drops there are residential,
Yeah.
where's the money coming from?
Well, the vast majority of the dollars are going to be coming from those residential customers, because there's 9 times more of them, right? One of the challenges is, let's say you had done 2 surveys back when you did the one with strategic marketing services, and you did one that said, hey, business owners, answer this, and you did another one that says, hey, residential, you answer this. The challenge is getting enough people to do the survey for the results to be really considered statistically accurate is difficult when you have a small sample size. And while you might only need 20% of the people, residential customers, to answer a survey for that to have some scientific certainty about the results, with a small group, say 200 businesses, you'd need like 130 of them to answer the same survey to have the same accuracy. So it's really hard with a small sample of population to get a sample that's scientifically accurate. The other thing I'd say to that is that I have not seen an example of all the communities that I've worked with in Iowa where the businesses haven't been the leaders. Almost every instance I've seen, it is the business community that is exceeding the residential community as far as take rates go. For a number of reasons. They are generally more interested in reliability. A residential customer may be willing to put up with a few outages as long as they can save $5 a month. Businesses can't handle that. They cannot handle that kind of service unreliability. So they're going to be there from day one in stronger numbers. The other thing is, quite frankly, most local business owners are incredible community supporters. And they're gonna get behind this thing at least at the similar types of take rates that you would see on the residential community. So I don't see any red flags about Vinton and your business versus residential compared to any other community in Iowa that we've seen. And if you do, then you address it by figuring out what is causing them not to switch.
Yeah, I agree with what both you're saying. It makes sense. And I'm not trying to do apples to oranges here, but the same business people are here, the same handful, 10% or less of the businesses in town are here, and almost 0% of the residential here. So if we're basing it on the public support from the business point of view, hospitals, schools, and businesses, and yet they're a small take, who's speaking for the 2,500 homes?
Well,
Well, that was the survey.
Where are they?
Necessarily gonna get people to click on the meeting. The survey, the things that are happening on social media, the things for communication, the talk, the people that come into these people's businesses that talk about wanting to meet with them. So we could do a drive and ask them to show up or at least voice their concern.
That's where it's gonna end up being, is hitting that take rate of the 62%. I mean, that's how many citizens, how many households. I mean, that's the unknown. We talk good here, but it still is, the unknown is the take rate.
If we
People
could,
aren't here.
if we could, Mike, I'd like to refresh everybody's memory. So SMS was a statistically valid survey, 95%. And Curtis